Okay, thanks everyone so much for coming. First, jury time, just technically CorTalk for this year. We have Lisa Spiering, who did an undergraduate in Berlin and is now doing a PhD with Matthew Rushworth in EP. And also, Lisa and I got to know each other doing an Open Win Ambassadors program, so she's also passionate about open science. I'll let her take it away. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for coming, everyone. Thank you for organizing this talk and having me, to the whole committee. So I'm Lisa. I'm doing my PhD. I'm now the fourth year of my PhD in EP, and I'm in Matthew Rushworth's group. And I'm going to present to you a study that we've been working on over the last few years, also together with my other supervisor, Jackie Scholl, who's now in PI in Lyon. This project is very broadly about controllability and cause and social collaboration. So we, as humans, we are inherently social creatures. So whenever something happens in our lives, we need to figure out to what extent our own actions caused that event to happen, or to what extent someone else caused that event to happen. And figuring out basically who causes what is pretty important, and really this can have really big consequences as well, doing this correctly or incorrectly. So if you're, for example, murder happened and you're Sherlock Holmes trying to figure out who out of this lineup of suspects committed this murder, then you really don't want to make any mistake. You don't want to send obviously an innocent person to prison. In the learning and decision making, so in our field, in the learning and decision making field, this problem, so attributing outcomes to causes, has been also called the credit assignment problem. So credit assignment is about learning about the causes of events. And it's been shown that credit assignment is really difficult, actually. So there's many studies that show this. These are just two studies that have been conducted here in Oxford as well in EP, that show that people, but actually also non-human primates, have different biases when assigning credit, so take irrelevant factors into account when assigning credit. And here in this particular study, we were interested in how humans assign credit, and how humans assign credit to themselves versus other people. And whenever there's multiple people working together towards a shared goal, towards a joint outcome, you not only need to take into account how much each individual person is, but also how much control, how much responsibility they have over the outcome. So to give you an example, if you worked on a research project and then submit a manuscript to a journal, and then you get, you're very lucky and your manuscript gets sent out for review, and then you get your reviewer feedback back, and it might be like this, so fairly good, but there's still some room for improvement. Then in order to know how you can improve your manuscript, you need to take into account how well you did, or what you contributed to the research project, but also how well your collaborators did, so this could be the supervisors, some other collaborators that you work with. But then you also need to take into account, crucially, how much control each person had. So if you're maybe the first author or the last author on the project, then you will have had lots of control over the project's outcome. But if you're maybe a middle author on the project and were maybe involved in supporting the data collection, but not beyond that, then maybe you will have not so much control over the project. And here we wanted to really see how people, when interacting with other people, when working together with other people, how people know how much control they have over outcomes. And our key hypothesis for this, we took from the causal reasoning literature. So in causal reasoning literature, there are these theories that you can only establish causality in a system by making what they call purposeful interventions into the system. So if you have a system with multiple variables, and these variables influence each other, then you can only know how one variable influences the other by making like an intervention into the system and seeing how this changes the system's output. Now this was a bit abstract, but to give you a concrete example of how what we are thinking of as purposeful interventions in our context, if you're playing football and you're, for example, and this is like a free kick situation, right, where this red opponent here tries to score the ball into this goal here at the very back, and if you're one of these three defenders that tries to block the ball from hitting the goal at the back, then you might wonder, okay, there's two other defenders right here in this trio, there's also this goalkeeper here at the very back. Do my actions even matter? Do I need to make any effort at all? So what you could do is, in one free kick situation, you could really try your best in blocking the ball, and then in another free kick situation you might not make an effort at all, so basically just maybe leave the page or something like this. And then see and basically compare whether this changes at all, whether the opponent can score or not. And to put this into a more formal framework, so in one scenario you might do your best, and then the feedback that you will see is based on your own performance weighted by your level of control plus another person's. So here we're now in the experiment, we're simplifying this a little bit, just talking about self and one other person, plus one other person's performance weighted by their level of control. And one thing that I should maybe also say is that whenever I say control throughout the talk, I'm always referring to the control from your perspective, so the control that you're exerting, and then the other person's control is kind of the inverse one minus your control. And so in one scenario you might do your best and then see the outcome that you get, see the feedback that you get, and then in another scenario you might do badly on purpose. And what happens then is that you take yourself out of this, basically do so badly that you take yourself out of this whole equation, and the feedback will be, for example, much lower, because then it's only based on how well the other person did, because you don't contribute anything anymore to the feedback. And what this then means is that you can infer how much control you have by observing the feedback difference that your performance makes, that changing your own behavior makes to the outcome. And to split this into a few concrete research questions. So first we wanted to see whether this is actually also what people do. So do people do badly on purpose to disambiguate outcomes, to disambiguate feedback? And this is a kind of behavior that I will, in this talk now, call active disambiguation. And do people infer their control based on the difference AD makes to the outcome, to feedback? And then lastly, which brain regions are involved to the processes? And also, if anyone has any questions, I'm very happy to take them also throughout. So we have enough time for questions, I think. So especially if you have comprehension questions, and I'm very happy to take them throughout. Okay, so to examine these questions, we developed a new task, and I collected data in 31 participants who did this task online, who did this task in the 3 Tesla scanner in OBA, and then also a small sample of just 36 participants who did this task online. So for those participants, we only have behavioral data. And then we translated this schematic that I already showed you before into a task where on every trial we showed participants feedback, for example, like this. And this feedback was then based on how, exactly like in the schematic that I've shown you before, was based on how well the participant does, how you yourself do, weighted by a certain level of control, plus how well another person does. So this is a cooperative context, so plus how well another person does, plus times weighted by their level of control. And then we, just before presenting them with this feedback, we asked participants to play a little game. Now what the games really look like doesn't really matter so much, so it's just important to know that these are really simple reaction time based games. In this one, for example, there is this white ball that rolls down from the top along this set of slides here, and then participants were asked to press a button when they think the ball passes by this green target cross here. And the thing that made this difficult is that there was this big black box around the target cross which hides the ball's path, so you actually, as a participant, not able to directly observe how when the ball passes by the target cross, but instead have to guess. And our motivation behind this was that we wanted participants really to learn from the feedback about how well they do in the games. So participant plays this game, and then we also told participants that there's a fictive other player that plays the game at the same time, but invisible to them, so they were not able to see the other person. And in that way, on every trial, the feedback that they were presented with was always based on how well the participant did on that trial and how well the other person did on that trial. And then, according to a predefined schedule, we manipulated participants' overall performance in the games, and the other fictive players' performance in the games, and also what level of control they exerted. So sometimes there were certain blocks when participants had maybe 50% of control, so it was just the average of self and other. Sometimes it was 80-20 or something like this. And these were the hidden latent causes that participants had to infer. Mm-hmm.
What did you tell the participants about the structure of it?
Mm-hmm. About what they were rewarded for?
No, like, I mean, how much did you tell them about, the structure of the task, like the feedback is a mixture of them and the other, and then it changes in blocks, and the other one, like, did you tell them the stuff, or did you have to work it out?
Yeah, so we told them before that the feedback is based on their own performance and someone else's performance, and we also told them that they had only a certain level of influence or control over the feedback. So that was not, that was instructed.
Did you tell them that it changed as well, like the other participant and the control changed in blocks?
Yeah. So there were distinct sections in the task with like different blocks. When so you only played with one other fictive person for 16 trials, and then we had a little info screen saying, okay, now you play with this other player and you play a different game. So we had different kind of cover stories for how to make sense of that. So then they also participants' task was to figure out their own control, how good they were at the games and how good the other person was. And so in the beginning of each trial, we asked participants to simply rate these three values. So we asked them, what do you think, who controls the feedback from only the other person to only myself? How good are you? So what's your overall performance at the game from very bad to very good? And how good is the other person from very bad to very good? And now here I just put this little schematic for another person, but actually then we had little pictures from some face stimulus database. And then, whenever you played with a new person, there was a different picture and so on. So people had like 16 trials together with one other person with a certain level of control and then a certain game, so they had to figure out these three values or variables. And then we told them, okay, now you play with a new other person, a new control level, and then it kind of went on. And in total, people completed 144 trials like this.
So the data being collected is their ratings,
and
I guess their actual reaction times, like if they're participating and what they're not.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So so I guess the straightforward thing about this task is that we really just ask them about their current beliefs about these three, about their control, most importantly. So we don't use a computational model or anything like that to infer that, but it's really self-reported. And then, so this first rating here is the control estimate that I'm going to talk about the most. So this task, there's quite a few different things that we looked at in this task, but the results that I'm going to show you are really only about how people infer their control, to estimate their control here from the feedback to approach, hopefully, the control, the true control that we set experimentally, so to say. And then we gave participants a bonus payment after finishing the task. So they were rewarded for how accurately they did their ratings. And so they were not actually rewarded for how well they played the games, but really for how well they did the ratings, so for how accurately they assigned credit.
Was that the end of every one of their ratings, or was it just at the end you got
just at the very end, yeah. So they didn't, that's a good point though, so they didn't know straight away how accurately they did the ratings, but just at the end of the task. And then, what we looked at then, or what we thought might happen, or what we also found that participants do, is that people then make these deliberate mistakes or active disinvigoration trials when they do play the game. So I'm going to show you now what this can look like, so how this kind of trial might happen. So you as a participant, you might first always do the ratings, and then you go on to play the game. On a given normal trial, you might just respond on time. So as the ball rolls down, you might just try your best in pressing the button exactly when you think it passes by the target cross. And this video works, so this is what it looked like. So the ball rolls down, and then maybe now you press the button. So you can see actually that the black box is quite big, so it's actually really hard to see, or I guess when the ball is where the target cross was. And on such a normal trial, the feedback that you might see is, for example, like this, and it's based on how well you did and the other person rated by your level of control. On an active disinvigoration trial, however, you might decide to just make this deliberate mistake, so respond way too late. And what you could do is that you press the button when the white ball has already exited the black box, so really when it's really obvious that it's nowhere near the target cross anymore, and this could then, for example, like this, the ball rolls down, and then it kind of exits the black box, and only then you press the button. And then on such a trial, then the feedback will be, for example, much lower because you didn't contribute anything to the feedback anymore. So that's the basic logic between these two trial types. And we found indeed that this is also what participants did. So this is just some data from an example participant. And what I'm plotting here for this game, for this participant, is with these colored dots here, is the position of the white ball when the participant pressed the button. And what you can see here is with these blue circles is there's quite a large number of trials when the participant pressed the button when the ball was behind the black box, so really close to the target cross. But there's also a considerable number of trials when the participant pressed either obviously really way too early or way too late when the white ball was basically already like outside of the box of the game. So this is just to show you that this is really something quite categorical, like that participants did, or this participant at least did, really something quite obvious in their behavior.
Are they doing this multiple trials in a row to like confirm with themselves, or is it just like every other, like, or is it sporadic?
Yeah. So some people, so I noticed that some people do it like every other trial, and some people do it more kind of 2 to 3 trials in a row, one thing, and then switch. Yeah, I didn't look at. I think that would be really interesting to look at what drives what kind of behavior in a sense, because I guess maybe sometimes you also might just maybe in the beginning of a block you might do these AD trials more to explore, not to kind of see what happens, to the feedback, and then maybe later towards the block when you already have learned a little bit how good you are, for example, how much control you have, then it might be more to just confirm your initial hypothesis. But yeah, I haven't looked at that. So one thing that we wanted to see first though was whether, so you might also think, because these are like either trials where this participant pressed way too early or way too late, that maybe this participant was just not paying attention. So we wanted to see first whether these trials were really on purpose or whether this was just accidental mistakes that we're capturing. So this, I'm going to show you a few, like a set of results that, from which we concluded this is really a deliberate behavioral strategy. And firstly, what we found is that participants use AD when it's useful for credit assignments. So what I'm plotting here is the proportion of AD on an average game task block. And so here's just trial number on the x-axis, and what you can see in this yellow section here, when the feedback is ambiguous, that around 20 to 25% of trials were AD trials across participants. Now, however, every now and then, actually, we not only told participants, okay, now you play with a new other player and you control that, as we said, or you play a new game, but we told them, now you play just a few trials on your own, and the feedback that you have complete control over the feedback, and the feedback basically just tells you how good you are at the game. So there's no uncertainty to resolve, credit assignment problem to resolve in that sense. And this is, these are these 4 dark blue trials that I'm plotting here in the middle. And this was queued, so participants knew that they were playing alone now. And what you can see is that the proportion of AD shows this really striking drop from above 20% to below 5%. And then after 4 trials, we told them, okay, now you know how well you do at the games, and now you can now you play with a new other player, and you share a certain level of control with that new other player. So you need to figure out again how good the other player is and how much control you have. And this is what happened here at the second dashed line. You can see here again that the proportion of AD rises to actually even above what it was before, so to even above or like around 25%. And this is a kind of result pattern that you would not necessarily predict from this AD trial just being accidental mistakes. But this already suggests that AD is driven by uncertainty or higher uncertainty, and people do this when it's useful for credit assignment. We also, after finishing the task, we also asked participants how they solved the task. So we asked them, how did you do it? And we found that actually people report doing AD in line with their behavior. So what I'm plotting here on the y-axis is again the average number of AD trials that a certain participant, that an individual participant had, against the number of reported AD trials that they told us in this post-task debrief questionnaire. And what you can see here for both the fMRI and the online sample data is that there's this really striking correlation between these 2 values. They really, this really matches what we detect in their behavior with their self-reports. We also found that AD reduces overall uncertainty, and now because participants didn't tell us how uncertain they were on a given trial, we used the Bayesian optimal learning model for this. So we constructed a Bayesian observer model that was then basically gave us estimates given the feedback that participants generated or observed, gave us estimates of self, other, and control that an optimal learner might hold. And didn't only give us basically optimal beliefs that you might hold in the task, but also belief distribution. And how it works with these Bayesian models is that the wider the belief distribution is, the more uncertain you are about this belief. So from this we can get a try-wise measure of uncertainty in our task. And what I found is that just using a regression analysis where I predict try-wise uncertainty by whether participants before did an AD try or 2 tries before did an AD try, and we found that after active disambiguation the uncertainty is significantly reduced. And this is again across both samples, you just split up, but the results are the same. And maybe even more interestingly, we find that AD leads to better credit assignment. So here I'm showing you the result of another regression analysis with the same regressors as here at the top, but now I'm not predicting overall uncertainty, but participants' rating errors. And what you can see is that after AD, participants' rating errors are significantly reduced. And this is also the case again for for the belief estimates from the optimal learning models, which are these small open dots. Yeah, so from this set of results, we concluded that AD trials are really on purpose, not just accidental mistakes, because we wouldn't make these predictions or find these results necessarily if this was just accidental mistakes. One other interesting thing that we found is we not only asked participants whether they did AD trials or deliberate mistakes, we called it in a debrief questionnaire, whether they did this or not. We also asked them how helpful they found these deliberate mistakes for solving the task. And what I'm showing you here is the helpfulness ratings from not at all to very much for that they rated for all 3 ratings. And what you can see is that people found AD trials most helpful for figuring out their own control. And this was also quite interesting for us. And so we went on then to see whether how people use AD trials to infer their control. And unless there's any questions about these results, and I'll move on to show you that. So just as a quick reminder, so do people learn their control from active disambiguation? Just as a quick reminder, our hypothesis here was that people do normal trials, where the feedback then is based on their own performance and the other player's performance, weighted by the level of control, but every now and then that they also do these deliberate mistakes, these AD trials, where they don't do so badly that they don't contribute anything at all to the feedback, so the feedback will be much different. And if you just look at these equations here, what you might be able to tell is that the feedback difference, or the difference between the feedback on the normal try when you do your best versus a try when you make a deliberate mistake, is based on your own overall performance weighted by your level of control. And then if you reshuffle this equation again, then this means you can infer your level of control by observing the feedback difference, but also taking into account your overall performance. And so I then tested whether this is basically the analytical solution, but I then went on to test whether this is also how people do this, so whether they infer their control over outcomes by varying their behavior and then seeing what difference this makes to the outcome, and while also keeping in mind how well they overall do. And I did this using a regression analysis where I predict on a given try people's control estimate by the feedback difference they just observed. So here I'm just looking at a subset of trials where people go from either an AD try to a normal try or vice versa. So I predict people's control estimate after observing such a feedback difference, interacting with the inverse of their what they rate of their own performance. This is just here, the inverse is just because according to the equation it would be divided by self. And what I found is that there was indeed a significant interaction between feedback difference and inverse self. So what this means is that people infer their control by integrating the feedback difference and the inverse self estimate. And so what I'm plotting here is this interaction effect. So you can see here the effect that feedback difference and self have on the control estimate. And just to make the interpretation of this plot a little bit easier, I just flipped the labels from inverse self to self again. And what you can see is that if the feedback difference is low, so if participants made a deliberate mistake and then the feedback changed barely, then they will infer a low control, which makes sense. However, if they make a deliberate mistake and the feedback changes a lot, then they will infer a higher control. However, how higher for control they infer depends a little bit on what they believe about their own performance. So if they overall believe that they don't do well in the games at all, and the feedback still changes a lot when they make a deliberate mistake, then this means that this must be accounted for by them having a lot of control still over the feedback. And we also confirmed that this is really an optimal behavior by running the same regression on simulated data from the Bayesian optimal learning model that I showed you before for the uncertainty results, and we find the same significant interaction effect of feedback difference and self on the control estimates of the optimal learner. We also then went another step further to confirm our intuition about these results and constructed two suboptimal learning models. So these were exactly like the Bayesian optimal learning model, but the only difference was that these two other wrong suboptimal learning models made wrong assumptions about what AD trials were. And our motivation behind this was that we wanted to see whether you really need to not only do AD trials and observe the feedback after AD trials, but you also need to know that you did AD trials and know what AD trials were, so to say. So what we did is we constructed one learning model that when AD trials happen, basically is a bit like someone who just gets confused by that happening, just ignores that for learning. And then we also constructed another learning model that when AD trials happened, thought that was just a normal trial basically, so just made different assumptions what different trial types were. And what we see is for these two suboptimal learning models, so for the ignorant learner and the passive learner, is that they show really markedly different result pattern for this interaction effect. So this then told us that you also, not only, as I said, not only need to know not only need to do AD trials, but also need to know what happened in order to figure out your control correctly. Okay. And then the last thing that I wanted to show you are the neural results for this study. So participants did this task in the 3 Tesla scanners. We can now look at what the neural correlates were for the behavioral results that I showed you. And so we ran a whole brain GLM and found that at the time of the action, so this is when participants played the game, the overall uncertainty, so this is from the Bayesian optimal learning model. Now the uncertainty across self, other, and control is represented in the supramarginal gyrus. So here we found a significant activation cluster. And we found deactivation cluster, so this means lower uncertainty, so higher certainty, in the DMPFC and the lateral orbital frontal cortex. And then secondly, also at the time of the action, we found that active disambiguation, so this is now a binary regressor, so just looking at, so is this an AD trial or not? And here activation clusters are related to you doing an AD trial, and deactivations are normal trials. And we found bilateral activation in the supramarginal gyrus again, and then also bilateral activation in DMPFC. In the DMPFC also extending into the dorsal ACC, which makes a lot of sense if you're familiar with the exploration and information seeking literature. You could also think of active disambiguation as a kind of exploration or information seeking behavior, and these brain regions have been shown already in the past to mediate these processes. So that's actually quite interesting that we find this for this type of behavior as well. And then we also found bilateral activation expanding across the anterior insular or lateral orbital frontal cortex a bit. But what was actually really striking for us here with this result was that we find that the supramarginal gyrus is involved in both tracking uncertainty and also whether you do an AD trial or not. And so we did some follow-up analyses on the board activity from this region. But before I show you that, I'm just going to give you a bit of background on what this region has been shown already to do in the past. So there's basically already been some literature suggesting that the supramarginal gyrus overall is like a higher level motor region. And there's already been a few studies showing that the supramarginal gyrus does action attributions in social settings. So there's, for example, this study by Angela Sirigu and colleagues where they had patients with lesions in this supramarginal gyrus. And what they found is that these patients, compared to healthy controls, that they confuse whether a hand movement that they observe is made by themselves or someone else's. And this was an experiment where they also covered the hand and the arm, so you couldn't just by looking at the hand kind of identify it as your own, but you really had to look at the hand movement to figure out whether you made that hand movement or like the experimenter made the hand movement. And there's also a few years after this, a study by Ferrer and Frith, actually an fMRI study of healthy participants, where they showed that activity in the supramarginal gyrus represents whether when you realize that an action that you, or an action outcome that you observe was caused by you or someone else. So this was a study where they gave participants a joystick, and then with the joystick, participants could control a dot that was moving on a computer screen. And but actually, every now and then, the experimenter controlled this dot moving on the screen. And then here they found that the supermargin gyrus, or the activity, is correlated with the extent to which you realize that the dot is controlled by you versus someone else. So this is just a bit of background on this study, but what we then went on to do is we wanted to see whether the supermarginal gyrus is also involved in mediating this whole control inference process that I explained to you before. So this is basically just looking for the neural correlates of this behavior pattern here. And so the question that we asked is whether the supermarginal gyrus represents not only the inferred control at the time of the outcome now, not only the inferred control and how much you update your beliefs about the control, so these are measures that we get directly from people's ratings, but also the components that you need in order to infer your control. So this is the feedback difference and the inverse of your self-estimate. And we found that, so this is now a time course analysis, and maybe I just explain briefly what the time course analysis is. So what we did is we just extracted the bold activity from a spherical ROI that's around the peak from one of the clusters that I showed you just before, and then basically just ran in GLM again on this bold activity to see whether it represents, for example, or it's modulated, for example, by the inferred control. And here I'm plotting the effect that control has on this bold activity of the supermarginal gyrus against time, and here time 0 is the onset of the outcome. And what you can see is that there's a significant modulation at around 6 seconds, and this is also what we would, because the bold response is quite sluggish and slow, this is kind of the time point when we would maybe expect this time course to peak, just given the hemodynamic response function. So we found that the supermarginal gyrus also at the time of the outcome represents the control that people infer. We find that it also represents the how much they update their beliefs about their control. Here now actually it's a deactivation that we found. We also found that it represents the feedback difference that people have observed. And now here I split up the time course into two different trial types. So the solid line is trials when people went on to do an AD trial, and then a normal trial, and the dashed line is when people go from a normal trial to an AD trial, so just looking at these two switch trials. And but the important thing is that both these time courses have this positive, or have significant deflection in the same direction. We did this, if anyone is interested, I can also explain this a bit further, but we just split up these two trial types just to do another control hypothesis to check whether maybe the supermarginal gyrus presents not feedback difference as normal versus AD, so keeps these labels of what the normal trial is and what an AD trial was. But we wanted to see whether maybe instead you could also do just current feedback versus previous, and if it was current versus previous, then on those two trial types, then the time courses would basically mirror each other. So this was just another control analysis that we did, but the important thing is that these time courses have a deflection in the same direction. And then last, we also found a representation of the inverse self in the supermarginal gyrus. So this was actually quite cool for us to see that the supermarginal gyrus represents all of these components that you need for, or that we found in the behavior, are relevant for control inference, for the control inference. Okay, so just to now to sum up, I've shown you some results with a new credit assignment task that we developed. That people establish their control over outcomes by employing what we call active disambiguation, so kind of information seeking, exploration behavior. And I've shown you that this is a behavior that's modulated by uncertainty overall, and that people also told us that they do this in line with their behavior, and that after AD that leads to better credit assignment and to lower uncertainty. We find, but then even more interestingly, we find that people then infer their control by comparing the difference AD makes, so changing their behavior makes to outcomes. And on a neural level, we found that the supermarginal gyrus mediates this whole control inference process. We found results that suggest that the supermarginal gyrus is involved in tracking whether you do an AD trial or not at the time of the action. And in doing some follow-up time course analysis, we found that it also represents the inferred control at the time of the outcome then, as well as the feedback difference from which you can infer your control. And yeah, just since last week, there's a preprint now on our archive if you're interested in this. And yeah, otherwise, thank you very much for your attention. And yeah, thank you as well to Matthew and Jackie, my supervisors, and to my collaborators. And this is a picture of some people that you might know, of Matthew's lab and also of Miriam Klein-Flügel's lab just here from a couple of years ago. Yeah, thank you very much.
Do you have any questions? Yes, Jeff.
So it could be that you already raised this a little bit, but in what sense is this actually a social thing? Because if we walk around in nature, we have continuously this need to see what we have control over, or what we're causing, and something else in nature is causing. And so also from the brain imaging data, I don't see anything that would suggest that this is purely a social thing, but it's just a brain sort of source attribution thing, right?
Yeah,
So what do you think?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. Yeah, so here we don't have a non-social control to check. So I don't have an easy answer to your question in that sense. I agree that I would also think, or speculating, I would also think that in non-social context people do this as well, or there's more, like just from these studies that I mentioned at the very beginning with this purpose for intervention is causal reasoning literature, and there's studies where they give people, I think they call it like a computer chip task or so, where they have like different nodes or so, and then you can activate or deactivate certain nodes in the system, and this is what they call an intervention. It's slightly different, I guess, to how we think about it here, with either making a mistake or doing your best. But I would also think that this is maybe some like a mechanism that people also do in non-social context, because it seems, because why not? I guess.
Right. Following on from that, is the supramarginal gyrus specific to primates, or like just humans, or what's the kind of anatomy across species there?
Yeah, that's also a good question. I'm not too sure. So I've never worked with primate or
I've never heard of it in a mouse, and I kind of wonder if I feel like mice do the same thing of hypothesis testing about the world to kind of infer how much control they have, but they are less social creatures than humans. So I wonder, is the supramarginal gyrus? There are other parts of the brain that can do this, but does this kind of region receive particular inputs of very high order social representations or something that would make it specifically here in humans?
I don't know how. Maybe you know better than I do. But good point.
You have a question, Thomas?
I think it was kind of a similar question, but I guess another thing I was wondering was do you think in social credit assignment tasks people solve, in the real world, do you think that this is a mechanism people use? And I asked that because the two examples you gave in, for should you put this person off reporting or not, or being on paper, it's a little hard to imagine someone deliberately doing really crap on the people. I'm just going to do really crap on this project to just tell how much control I've got. It doesn't I can believe people would use these kind of interventions in some situations, but actually in real world social credit assignment tasks, that seems like perhaps somewhere you wouldn't use this mechanism.
I agree. Of course, it's here we really made it very extreme, really doing badly, super badly. But this was also to simplify it a little bit so that people could, so we just finalized the trials. But I think maybe in real life, maybe in real life people wouldn't do completely crap. But maybe what they would do is just vary their behavior a little bit, and this is something that I could imagine. So just seeing whether maybe in this project I'm just gonna not go 200%, but just maybe 100% have a healthier life, and see whether it's also good enough. So I think maybe in that. Maybe it's a bit more realistic, and maybe this could be something. There's maybe something to follow up on with this study as well to make this maybe a bit more parametric.
I guess having a situation where people have to train, because here you're incentivizing them only for the feedback accuracy, not for performance. But I guess in the real world, you probably want you have to balance those two things. And it might produce some more graders.
I agree. So here we wanted to make sure that there's nothing stopping people from doing it. So we really gave them reward just for the rating accuracy. Although actually when we were piloting this task, initially we had I think at some point we had a version where we also gave the reward a bit for the game performance, but then people really, didn't want, really only did their best. So I think it's quite, I mean, also with the feedback that you give, now it's really incentivizing to just try as hard as you can. So we had to kind of calibrate this a little bit. But yeah, I think that would be also really interesting follow up.
Any last questions? Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Lisa.
thank you for having me.